Roman Travers. Magic Talk.
It's a very good morning to you, Executive Coach Harold Hillman. G'day, mate.
Good day, Roman.
How are you feeling?
I'm doing okay. It's we've been in lockdown for a little over a week now, and so I've locked into a new routine, which includes getting out for an hour each day just to do a long walk. But this has actually created an opportunity for me to dig into a book that I'm writing. At the top of the year, I was really worried that I wouldn't have sufficient time to meet a firm deadline. But so this is there's a silver lining in the coronavirus cloud.
True. Is it going to be a murder mystery?
No. It's a book on it's a book on empathy. Actually, it's called Empathy: Making It Real for Leaders. And because we're going through this particular scenario right now, I'm actually seeing great examples of empathy from leaders and organizations who are pushing through a scenario that none of us were. A decade ago might not never have conceived of this. And so I am noticing a lot of empathy on as people are connecting with each other just to keep each other well.
Yeah, that's really good. I've just noticed in my real job just how busy we are. We're all doing so many. Between Australia and New Zealand, we're doing lots and lots of WebExes, and quite often I get to about 3 o'clock and realise I haven't brushed my teeth, I haven't got up and done anything that means anything. But for leaders of teams, for my boss, for example, how do you remain an effective leader during this time?
There's a model called Situational Leadership that's been out there for about 3 decades or so. And the situational leadership model is predicated on the belief that there is no one best style of leadership, and that a leader will have to take a number of things into consideration, depending on the situation, the task at hand, which most of us are now in a bit of a reactive mode in trying to stabilize things, and then the capability of the team. And so your leadership will move around. In a crisis scenario like COVID-19, what we call directive leadership, sometimes it's called autocratic or command and control, where there's more hands-on. But we find that in an emergency or crisis situation, directive leadership is favored because it deals with the immediate pressures and repercussions on the business, where you have to be making decisions within a matter of hours as opposed to having the luxury of consulting with everyone across the business for 3 months before you make a decision. There are some scenarios where command and control, or what we call directive leadership, is appropriate, and I would suggest that the COVID-19 outbreak is one of those times when people really do appreciate when their leaders are closer to the action, closer to them, and showing some leadership by being decisive.
As an executive coach, with the work that you're normally doing face-to-face, sitting in a room with people, are you noticing that a good leader really starts to shine now, rather than that kind of cracking the whip one standing over you? This relies on a lot of trust, doesn't it?
It really does. When you're hands-on and sort of micromanaging people, that does fall under that management realm where you're just sort of standing over people with a clipboard, with a checklist, and making sure that people are going from, proceeding with their work. Leadership is different. Leadership is required at a time like this because the future is a little hazy right now, and people are more anxious. They're more vulnerable. So leaders have to stay close to their teams. And even though none of us can say definitively what 4 months from now is going to look like, it is important for leaders to keep people optimistic, because optimism in a time like this really does matter. It's important to be candid, and it's important to be realistic with people, not distorting reality. But you'll find that optimism, we can push through this, we can do this, really does invigorate people, in a way that that checklist management style doesn't.
Yeah, well, we've seen some really good leadership coming out of late. We've got great leadership here. New York's governor is a great example of great leadership.
Great example. Yeah. Great example.
Talk to me about decisiveness prevailing over consultative behavior.
Well, on that situational leadership model, if you look at it as a continuum, directive leadership is what I was just talking about, more hands-on, considered to be a bit more autocratic, where you don't necessarily spend weeks at a time trying to get every staff member's opinion before you decide. So at one end, we have directive or autocratic. All the way at the other end of the continuum, you have what's called consensus leadership, where literally the leader is just one vote. And, sometimes that consensus is 75% of us agree, so therefore we can push through. Yep. Directive leadership is required, and it is most appreciated. It was sort of like after 9/11 in New York when I lived in New York, and that was back before Rudy Giuliani was more controversial. But he was really regarded very well. He energized the city. He brought us together. It was a time where decisions were being made on an hourly basis. And it is important for leaders to be present and not to detach from their teams, but to be present, hear them out, be empathic, understanding that people have got a lot going on in their lives. In some cases, their partner may have lost their job or their job may be pending. Yeah. The kids are at home. Kids are anxious. And so what I would just say around directive leadership is be present, be decisive, be empathic.
As a leader, when you're working remotely, it's not that remote. I mean, you can see people if you want on WebExes and Zoom and things like that. But is this a good time to empower people, your subordinates, to make choices for themselves?
It is. You've got teams that I'm working with are checking in now on a daily basis, if not every other day. And what in the military we used to call those stand-up meetings, where we are going through an unusual time, an emergency situation here. So everybody gets together. People talk about what they're doing, what they need. And even though leaders may be more directive right now, it's helpful to just test your thinking with members of your team, not on a long 3-week process, but in a brief conversations, just so that they believe that they really feel empowered, that they're helping you arrive at those decisions that you have to make. But at the other end, it just gets slower. In other words, more people you involve. The idea of being at the other end of the continuum with consultative leadership and consensus leadership, maybe you have won the hearts and the minds of people because you've taken a little bit more time to get there and their input. But now is a time truly for directive, decisive leadership.
That old-fashioned model of having to sit in peak hour traffic in Invercargill to get to work and then, sitting at work for 8 hours and then sitting in peak hour traffic heading home again. People are saying one of the benefits of all this that we're going through at the moment with the lockdown is the time they have to sit with their family and have breakfast and actually see them doing some homework with their virtual classroom stuff. Is this a good time to build a new routine?
It is a good time to build a new routine. Routines are important, particularly when people are anxious. And so whether it be parents who are at home now and with their kids who are school age, it's important to get those kids locked into a routine because structure and routine tends to mitigate anxiety. It's no different in the workplace in the sense that teams are now working a bit differently, and that will be the case over the next month and a half or so. And so rather than things just being all over the place and no priorities, it really is helpful in the workplace or in the home to establish a routine so that we lock into a sense of certainty around some things.
Yeah, totally. And commercial real estate could change forever. There'll be some workplaces, I guess, Harold, that just will never return to that expensive commercial real estate because this may work better for some people.
Hey, there's already been a number of articles on LinkedIn, and people are already talking about the new normal on the other side of COVID-19 as it pertains to how we work together, how we connect across a given day. And I firmly believe that virtual connection is going to continue, if not enhance. It's actually made a big difference. I'm hearing from members of teams who I'm working with that they actually feel closer. There's more frequent contact than during BAU. People are checking in on each other virtually daily or every other day. And you and I have talked about the trust equation in terms of what really builds trust. And one of the 4 factors is this thing called intimacy. And intimacy is basically getting to know the person as a whole person as opposed to just your coworker who sits next to you during the day and then the rest of their life is a void. I've noticed this myself in terms of the intimacy factor has kicked in on these teleconferences because we get to see into the lives of our coworkers. We get to see their art. We get to see their kids. We get to see their pets.
Get to see their backside sometime when they walk out of the bathroom, forgetting that the camera's on, honestly. Hey, just quickly.
There's been a couple of scenarios like that.
Harold, is it possible, just very quickly, is it possible to over-communicate?
I don't think so. Not in a scenario like this. There is no such thing as over-communication when you're taking a team through a crisis. The less you communicate, the more likely people will build their own theories about what's going on.
Yeah. Harold, it's a pleasure to catch up with you. As always, Harold Hillman, Executive Coach. Catch up with him. He's with the Sigmoid Curve Consulting.